Dobar dan, buongiorno, hello, guten Tag, Jona Podkiva. Dobrodošli, benvenuti, welcome, willkommen. Dobrodošli torej na tem mednarodnem posvetu, mednarodni konferenci. Ste med sabo, med strokovnjaki o tem temo vojaških pokopališčih z Prve svetovne vojne. So welcome to your international conference on the topic of the military cemeteries and the Isonzo Front. You are here among yourselves, you're all experts and interested in that. So my role will be just to give you the word, torej moja vloga bo praktično, da vam dajem besedo. Še prej pa, preden začnemo s tematiko, bi dal besedo za uvodne pozdrave nekaterim prisotnim. But before we start with the technical and the topical issues, we would like to hear from the local hosts to welcome us, and I would like to call bi rad povabil gospoda Zdravka Vikarja, predsednika uprave Ustanove fundacije Poti miru v Sočju. Zdravko Vikar, head of the board of the foundation Poti miru v Sočju.
Dan vsem, lep pozdrav v imenu fundacije Poti miru. Fundacija je bila ustanovljena pred 22 leti zato, da zavaruje nepremično dediščino Sočke fronte, da vzgaja mlade v tem v duhu miru in pa da jim pove, kaj se je tu pred 100 leti dogajalo, kajti Posočje je močno zaznamovano s zgodovino. Seveda, prva vojna je pustila največje sledi, vendar od prazgodovine pa vse do današnjih dni zgodovina tu je odigrala veliko vlogo, tudi zelo kruto, zelo krvavo v obeh vojnah in še prej v vseh prejšnjih obdobjih. No, mi se osredotočamo na Prvo svetovno vojno in na pokopališča. Moram povedati, da tu na ozemlju zgornjega Posočja je 7 pokopališč avstro-ogorskih, ena italijanska kostnica, ena nemška kostnica in pa kostnica avstrijskih vojakov padlih v Napoleonovih vojnah. In poleg tega imamo tudi 21 partizanskih grobišč, urejenih in grobnic, tako da je to zemlje res posejano z ostanki mladih ljudi, predvsem mladih, ki so tu padli v vseh zgodovinskih obdobjih. No, jaz bi rad se zahvalil sodelavcem na fundaciji Poti miru, predvsem pa Mihu Uršiču, ki je tako lepo skrbel za to, da bo danes konferenca uspešna, in vsem želim lepo delo. Pozdravil sem še tudi pozdraviti prav našega župana Marka Matejurca in seveda gospoda Vikarja z Ministrstva za obrambo ter druge visoke goste. Hvala.
Thank you very much. Greetings from me as well. We have established the foundation of Walk of Peace 22 years ago with that intention, with the intention of preserving, of course, the military heritage that we have here, and also to educate the younger generations for peace. Because our region has been marked by history very strongly, not only by the Great War, but by the Second World War and all the preceding events that unfolded throughout the history, up to back the prehistoric times. We have here quite a few cemeteries when we talk about that. 7 Austro-Hungarian cemeteries, 1 Italian ossuary, 1 German ossuary, another ossuary, Austrian ossuary for soldiers that have fallen during the Napoleonic Wars. So it is a territory strongly marked in cruel way by history, and also is scattered with rests of young soldiers that have lost their lives here. So that was our wish to preserve this heritage in future memory. And I would like to thank you for organizing mention this conference. Particularly, I would like to thank Michałovic, who really made quite a lot to organize it, to welcome you here. And of course, I wish you very good work this afternoon. And tomorrow, I would like to greet our mayor, also here, Mateusz, and of course, Mr. Popluka from the ministry and others that have come. Thank you. Sedaj pa seveda dajmo besedo omenjenima, torej županom občine Kobarid, Mateuszu, in potem še naslednjemu gostu, torej now we are giving the floor to the person that have been mentioned, the mayor of Kobarid, Mr. Marko Mateusz.
Hvala lepa za besedo. Dovolite mi, da v imenu občine Kobarid in seveda v mojem imenu prav lepo pozdravim vse visoke gosti in vse navzoče tukaj na mednarodni konferenciji o vojaških pokopiščih Prve svetovne vojne. Naše kraje Prva svetovna vojna resnično hudo prizadela in pustila velike posledice tudi na tukaj živečih ljudeh. Vemo, da tukaj v teh krajih so umirali mladi fantje in može za mir. Občina Kobarid je še posebej ponosna na fundacijo Pot miru in seveda muzej v Kobaridu, ki prikazuje vso zgodbo Prve svetovne vojne in nedvomno tudi vseh ostalega, kar se je tukaj dogajalo v našem preteklem obdobju. Ponosni smo tudi na vse zasebne zbiratelje, ki tukaj svojo dediščino ohranjajo na takšen način. V občini Kobarid se zavedamo vsega tega pomena in seveda tudi podpiramo to konferenco, vse te prizadevanja muzeja Kobarid in seveda fundacije Poti miru v Posočju. Tako da, kar zadeva občine, bomo tudi bodoče stali ob strani tem organizacijam, ki skrbijo za vse to. Na koncu bi se samo še zahvalil za vašo prisotnost, ker z vašo prisotnostjo tudi na nek način počastite vso to krvavo preteklost žal, ki se je dogajala tudi na naših tleh. Za konec pa samo še želim prijetno in uspešno delo seveda in tudi prijetno bivanje v občini Kobarid. Hvala lepa.
Yes, I would like to thank you for having me here. I would like to thank you for being here on my behalf personally and as mayor of the city of Kobarid. I would like to welcome you all as experts on this international conference on the cemeteries from World War I. Yes, as already heard, we have a territory that is strongly marked by World War I, not only by the immovable heritage or the material heritage, but also it's felt by people living here. They have been marked for quite a long time by that. Because we know that the young men that have fallen here were fighting for peace in the end. We are proud as a municipality of the foundation, Walk of Peace, for everything they're doing at the museum that we have here in Kobarid, which are two very important contributions of the memory of the Great War. We were also proud, equally, of our private collectors who have quite some artifacts and they are preserving them really well. We are aware of that importance, of the importance of preserving these artifacts and memories of the past. That's why the municipality has always offered and will continue to offer its support to the foundation and the museum to your efforts of preserving this memory also in the future. So I'd like to thank you once again. I would like to wish you a good conference and of course a pleasant stay here in Kobarid. In naslednji je naš naslednji gost, gospod Kobarid, direktor Uprave Republike Slovenije za vojaško dediščino, the director of the Office of the Republic of Slovenia for Military Heritage, Dr. Kobarid.
Spoštovani gospod župan občine Kobarid, spoštovani predsednik uprave gospod Zdravko Linkar, oče fundacije Poti miru v Posočju, spoštovana direktorica fundacije Poti miru v Posočju, spoštovane kolegice in kolegi, spoštovani visoki gosti. Domačini v Posočju so skozi svojo dolgo in krvavo zgodovino še kako občutili, kaj pomenijo vojne in vojaški spopad. Samo v zadnjih nekaj več kot 100 letih sta te kraje zavedno zaznamovali 2 svetovni vojni, ter vojna za samostojno in neodvisno Slovenijo. Še posebej je prebivalstvo Posočja prizadela prva svetovna vojna, ki je dolini prinesla mnogo gorja, uničene domove, razseljene družine ter ogromno število mrtvih vojakov. Kobarid zelo spoštljivo skrbi za zgodovino svojega kraja, vojaško dediščino ter vojaške grobišča. Fundacija Poti miru v Posočju, Kobariški muzej ter številni zasebni zbiratelji so izjemni kronisti nekega neusmiljenega časa, hkrati pa tudi zelo jasen opomin, da se nam kaj takega ne sme nikoli več zgoditi. Spoštovani, spoštljivo urejena vojaška grobišča v Posočju ter drugje po Sloveniji so civilizacijska norma in odraz spoštovanja do vseh padlih in ubitih. Na novoustanovljeni upravi za vojaško dediščino Ministrstva za obrambo se zavedamo, da je na področju vojaških grobišč veliko dela in izzivov, ki jih bomo zmogli rešiti le skupaj z lokalnimi skupnostmi in našimi partnerji. Veseli smo, da je Fundacija Poti miru v Posočju naš zanesljiv partner že dolgo razporedil. Današnji posvet o vojaških grobiščih je pomemben dogodek, ki ga na upravi Republike Slovenije za vojaško dediščino še kako podpiramo in se veselimo strokovnih referatov in konstruktivnih razprav. Zahvaljujemo se Fundaciji Poti miru v Posočju za povabilo in organizacijo posveta, vsem vam pa čestitke o državnem prazniku, dnevu vrnitve Primorske k matični dnevu. Hvala lepa.
There, Mr. Mayor, the Municipality of Kobarid, respected President of the Board of the Foundation Walk of Peace, father of the Foundation actually, the Director of the Foundation, dear colleagues, esteemed guests, welcome, greetings on my behalf. Throughout the long and bloodthirsty history, the locals in Soča region have felt what wars and military conflicts are like. Only in the last few hundred years, these places were forever marked by 2 world wars and the war for the independence of Slovenia. The population of Soča region was particularly affected by the First World War, which brought to this valley many woes, destroyed homes, displaced families, and brought about a huge number of dead soldiers. And the city of Kobarid still respects the history of its place, its military heritage and military cemeteries. The Walk of Peace Foundation, the Kobarid Museum, and many private collectors are exceptional chroniclers of a merciless time, but also a very clear reminder that something like this should never happen again. So, respected guests, the well-arranged military cemeteries in Soča region and elsewhere in Slovenia are a civilizational norm and a reflection of the fact that we show their respect to all fallen and all killed. At the newly established Military Heritage Administration of the Ministry of Defense, we are well aware that there is still a lot of work to do, and there are challenges in the area of military cemeteries, which we will be only able to solve together with local communities and our partners. We are glad that the Walk of Peace in the Soča Foundation has been our reliable partner for so many years. Today's convention on military cemeteries is an important event, which we, at the administration of the Republic of Slovenia for Military Heritage, continue to support, and we are looking forward to expert papers on the topic and to your constructive debate. I would like to thank the Foundation of Peace for the invitation and for having organized this conference, and would like to and my congratulations to all of you on this today's national holiday when the region of Primorska was returned to its motherland. Thank you. Torej, ne bom se ponavljal, pa se bom. I will not repeat myself, but once again I will. Because I love to say and remember these things. To je stvar, ki se rad spominjam in rad opominjam na njo, vsakič, ko govorimo o zgodovini. Every time we speak about history. We have two approaches. Imamo dva pristopa do zgodovine. Two historians that have different approaches. Dva zgodovinarja, ki sta imela različne pristope. Herodot in Thukydides. Herodotus or Thucydides. And one had the approach of celebrating the heroes, the kings and the emperors. Prvi je imel to navado, da je, oziroma v svojih spisih je hvalil in častil slavo cesarjev, kraljev, poveljnikov. Drugi je vojno opisoval samo zato, da bi posvaril na to, da se kaj takega ne sme več zgoditi. The second was describing his military history only to warn for things like that not to ever happen again. Medtem ko je prvi častil herojska dejanja, while the first was celebrating the heroic achievements of military commanders, drugi je govoril o težavah ljudi in navadnih vojakov. The second was describing the toils of simple soldiers and people. In to je spomin vojaških pokopališč. This is what the military cemeteries are also about, reminding us of the terrors of war. Torej nek spomenik grozodejstva vojne. Da se spomnimo, da se to ne sme več zgoditi nikoli. So that we remember that this should never happen again. In to je ta drugi vidik zgodovine, ki je meni bolj všeč. This is the second approach to history, which I like more. Ampak prisluhnimo strokovnjakom. But let's hear from the experts rather. Torej, vabim na oder Damjana Fortunačevega bloga Slovenskega muzeja, da nas pregovori o bazi podatkov o žrtvah Sočke fronta v zgodnjem Sočju. So I'd like to invite Damjana Fortunačevega from the Museum of Tunin about the database of the victims of the Isonzo Front in the upper Isonzo Valley.
Lep pozdrav, tudi v osebnem imenu, mislim, v imenu Tuninskega muzeja, ki ga zastopam kot direktorica. S tematiko, ki jo danes obravnavamo, se ukvarjam že vrsto let. In kot je bilo že rečeno, je Sočka fronta močno zarezala v življenja ljudi ob Soči, po koncu vojne pa so se soočili tukajšnji ljudje tudi z novim razočaranjem. Z Rapalsko mirovno pogodbo je bila leta 1920 začrtana nova meja in tretjina slovenskega etničnega ozemlja je bila takrat dodeljena Italiji. Prav danes pa praznujemo dan vrnitve Primorske k matični domovini in ob tem bi dragi Primorci in Primorke vsem čestitala ob tem prazniku. Naši stari starši in starši so se v času fašizma trudili ohranjati slovenski jezik, zato sem si dovolila vsaj teh nekaj uvodnih besed v materinem jeziku. The Isonzo Front had a strong impact on the lives of the people along the Soča River, and after the end of the war, they faced a new disappointment. With the Treaty of Rapallo between the Kingdom of Italy and the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes in 1920, a new border was determined and a third of Slovenian ethnic territory belonged to Italy. Today, we are celebrating the day of the return of Primorska to its homeland. Our grandparents and parents tried to preserve the Slovenian language during the difficult times of fascism, so I allowed myself at least few introductory words in my mother language. I started dealing with military cemeteries as a conservator at the Institute for the Protection of Cultural Heritage in Nova Gorica when I also started to systematically record the immovable heritage of the Isonzo Front. Here are some slides of preserved cemeteries, like the best preserved cemetery in Longford, Mangerton, then picture of the cemetery in Soča near Tolmin, cemetery in Modrece, and the last slide from the cemetery Gorjansko, which is also a well-preserved cemetery. When I started my research, there was not much information about these cemeteries. In the 60s of the 20th century, the Commission for the Protection, Regulation and Maintenance of Cemeteries and Graves of Soldiers collected data for the area of the Tolmin municipality. For this purpose, they used a short questionnaire and after site visits, produced technical reports with proposals for appropriate renovation or maintenance of the cemeteries. Based on this material, some basic information was known. In some places also the number of those varied. During and after World War II, some military cemeteries were in poor condition. In the 80s of the 20th century, many cemeteries were renovated, and in the second half of the 80s were declared a cultural monument. At that time, they decided to restore the cemeteries in a way that was easier to maintain. While collecting archival, documentary and other material, I realized that many military cemeteries were abandoned during the time between the two wars. For several locations of cemeteries with preserved individual elements, there was no solid evidence that they were abandoned. There were a few such cases in the Karst, as well as at the Klauže Podmerec. Later was discovered a document which indicates that the cemetery was not exhumed. On the 80th anniversary of the events on the Isonzo Front, interest in the heritage of the Isonzo Front increased. At that time, I cooperated with the Austrian Black Cross, and we were confronted with their data, which did not match the data we had. Their numbers were much higher. Regardless, the initiative of the Austrian Black Cross was implemented, and new memorials were erected in the cemeteries. In the meantime, the cooperation with the Hungarian In the meantime, the cooperation with the Hungarians also intensified. With the approaching 19th anniversary of the event on the Isonzo Front, interest in the heritage of that period increased again. And there were more inquiries about those who fell on the Isonzo Front too. In 2002, the Czech erected, I don't know why it's happened this. In 2002, the Czech erected a memorial to the fallen Czech soldiers on England, and on that occasion I met Mr. Arthur Rehberger. He asked me to find his uncle's grave, and I was glad to be successful. Researching military cemeteries at that time connected me to two other Czech researchers, with Karl Martinek and František Stekli. All three were preparing lists of the fallen Czechs in the area of the Tolmin bridgehead. Later, we exchanged lists of the fallen. And now about the Tolmin Museum's extensive research project Tolminsko mostišče, Tolmin bridgehead, which started in 2003. The project that I managed was ambitious. We invited Mr. Lovro Galic from Zagreb to cooperate with us. He dedicated his work to collecting archival material in the Vienna War Archive and in Budapest too. I undertook research in the Italian archives in Rome and the archives in Gorica and Nova Gorica. The material kept by the Tolmin Museum was also an important source for the research. And my colleague Daria Pirich processed the parish archives and made lists of locals who fell on the Isonzo Front and other fronts. We also invited Dr. Branko Marušić and Dr. Petar Svolšak to cooperate with us. Territorially, the research was first limited to the area of the former Tolmin bridgehead and on area of the cooperation of the 15th Austro-Hungarian Corps. We relied on various available sources. First of all, handwritten transcription of the lists of those buried in the cemeteries around Most na Soči, which is kept in the Tolmin Museum. Then material in the military archive in Vienna, such as different registers and documentation on military cemeteries, mostly from 1918. And here is one map from this archive. You can see a map of Mersdyberg and how many cemeteries were on that location. And here is the map of the cemetery in Loče. We used also the list of the fallen written in the Javorca Memorial Church, which dates until July 1960. Then, the original plan of the German cemetery near Tolmin, kept by Tolmin Museum, and also the list of those buried, kept by the archive in Nova Gorica. We used also the list written in a mosaic in the German ossuary near Tolmin. And the list of the Italian soldiers buried in ossuary in Kobarid, kept by the archive in Nova Gorica too. In November 2003, I went to Rome and visited 3 archives: Commissariato Generale Onoranze Caduti in Guerra, Archivio Centrale dello Stato, and Ufficio Storico Esercito. My work in the Italian archives was focused on the Italian post-war or interwar interventions in cemeteries and the final arrangement of them. In the archive, Commissariato Generale Onoranze Caduti in Guerra, I obtained information about Italian military cemeteries which were abandoned after the end of the World War I, and the posthumous remains relocated to ossuaries or other existing cemeteries. Unfortunately, this office only keeps material relating to the area that are today in the territory of Italy. However, in their archive, I found a document from which it is clear that in 1943, part of the material from the period of the Italian renovations of the cemeteries was destroyed during the bombing of Milan. In the archive, Ufficio Storico Esercito, I found the instructions from the period of the arrangement of the cemeteries and their placement in the landscape. I also found lists of Austro-Hungarian and Italian cemeteries with numbers of buried soldiers and a map, which you see here, with their locations marked. With blue mark are Italian cemeteries and with red the Austro-Hungarian. And what about the results of our research work of the project? First of all, in 2005, the Tolmin Museum prepared the occasional exhibition Tolminsko mostišče, Tolmin bridgehead, with the catalogue. Then, in the same year, the Tolmin Museum published 2 extensive publications, Tolminsko mostišče 1 and 2, Tolmin bridgehead 1 and 2. In the second part, we published for the first time the list of fallen Austro-Hungarian soldiers in the area of the once Tolmin bridgehead. We wanted to prepare a list of those buried in existing cemeteries. But however, based on the collected data, we have found out that we cannot define with certainty the final locations of individual graves. We did not even have all the information about where the remains of dead from certain abandoned cemeteries were relocated. We decided to publish a list of the cemeteries existed in 1980. 11,780 known and unknown Austro-Hungarian soldiers were registered. During extensive work, we find out that mistakes were made when copying into different lists already in the war and post-war time. In the book Tolminsko mostišče 2, we also published the list of locals who fell during the war. It consists 853 persons from the area of the Tolmin municipality. After that, we continued our work, and in 2007 we published the book Od Krna do Radona, 1915-1945, settlements from current Europe on, with the financial support of the Walk of Peace in the Soča Region Foundation. In that book, we also published lists of fallen Austro-Hungarian soldiers, Russian prisoners of war, Serbian prisoners of war, Germans, and also a list of the 644 fallen locals from the villages of the municipality of Kobarid and Kovac. All our books accumulated interest among the locals, as well as the embassies of the nations that fought on the Isonzo Front. And around 2010, the Walk of Peace in the Soča River Foundation decided to financially support the project of creating a computer database. So the museum handed over all the collected data to be used for this purpose. The data first had to be processed into a suitable format for the transmission. When preparing publications, we used data from the Excel tables, but we had to correct certain data. The database, in which 20,935 persons were entered at the time, still needs some corrections, as well as additions based on the list created abroad in recent years. On the centuries of the event of World War I, the Tallinn Museum started another research project, this time about Javor's Memorial Church. Based on the Gaining family archive, an extensive and high-profile traveling exhibition, the Memorial Church of the Holy Spirit in Javorca, 100 Years of Basilica of Peace, was prepared. With that exhibition, we toured European cities from Vienna to Gorica, in Villach, Prague, Rijeka, Idrija, and this year in the Slovenian Museum of Christianity in Stična. The exhibition was also a good basis for preparing a successful nomination for the European Heritage label. I must highlight also the extensive monograph published by the Tallinn Museum, in which we published all 2,565 names of the fallen Austro-Hungarian soldiers from the Javorca Memorial Church for the first time. After that, we decided to combine the numerous data we obtained in various projects in the last year into the database Victims of the Isonzo Front in the Upper Soča Valley. In this database, we included the rubrics Victims, refugee camps, memorials, and also cemeteries. And finally, if you allow me, I would like to draw attention also to some dilemmas and problems related to military cemeteries. With the increase of interest towards the heritage of the Isonzo Front, several interventions on the heritage from the period took place on the basis of various initiatives. The approach should be particularly thoughtful and credible with dealing with military cemeteries. As I mentioned, we can confirm with certainty that some military cemeteries have been abandoned. Marking the locations of former cemeteries can be misleading. For the preserved military cemeteries in the Upper Soča Valley, we cannot give exact numbers of those buried in certain cemeteries. Different numbers appear in different documentation and literature too. The computer database, which was created on the basis of data that we collected and published printed in 2005 and 2007, calls for further processing by taking into account the known lists and database that have been created in recent years by several nations, for example by Czechs, Hungarians, and also Ukrainians. And finally, I would add an initiative to prepare a sort of general rules for visitors to the military memorials in Slovenia, with kindly requesting to not enter improperly dressed, light candles, walk on the graves, picnic inside the memorial, which happens unfortunately, walk animals, display political party and of trade union flags or other symbols, inside the memorial. It happened that on the grave of the fallen of a known nationality, ribbons with the colors of the country of another nation was added. We were warned about this during the visit of one delegation from abroad. And on the end, I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope that I wasn't so long. And if you wish to learn more about the history of this area, do not hesitate to visit our Tolmin Museum in Tolmin. You are welcome. Thank you.
Hvala, thank you. Naslednjo dajem besedo Petri Solšak, oziroma Zastazu Petra Solšak from the Academy of Sciences, on the databases of the fallen and the front, o podatkovnih bazah opatih na frontah.
So, dear colleagues, dear friends, as a historian, I cannot begin my paper without a historical reflection on war graves, which are the true essence of what I will present at the end of my talk. Notwithstanding its political, economic, environmental, and material cost, the World War I was a cultural, symbolic, and commemorative turning point. The First World War shaped the citizen in uniform paradigm, thus mobilizing the body and soul, men and women and children, the economy and social systems to support and back the war effort. Since it was the first time in history that mass mobilization was announced, and since it was also the first industrial and total war, its most immediate consequence, to be cynical and realistic at the same time, was a large-scale loss of life. Therefore, it is conceivable that military cemeteries have become the most striking and common reminders of all aspects of the Great War on all its fronts. When in 2018 Belgium and France proposed to the World Heritage Center the inclusion of the so-called burial places on the UNESCO World Heritage list, the center found itself faced with, at the moment, a seemingly unsurmountable issue. What messages do such small events convey, they themselves being a direct reflection of the destructive nature of war? The large-scale loss of life called on the contemporaries to rethink burial rituals and the personified and individual cult of the fallen, thus the individualization was the only humane response to the inhumanity of war. The result of this more or less deliberate decision was a large number of military cemeteries and graves, similar in appearance, the uniformity of which was meant to signify that all are equal in death, thus transcending any earthly differences. Inscriptions on tombstones were meant to reflect the wish to commemorate each and every individual soldier, provided, of course, that their body had been found and identified, whereby it is important to note that bodies of many fallen soldiers have still not been recovered. On the Western Front, special memorials were erected to honor these soldiers. Identification procedures were determined by the army, and a generalized view of Austro-Hungarian procedure shows that the identification was carried out by 2 witnesses, while a military chaplain recorded a note into the register book, even if the body was left on the battlefield or in the enemy's hands. The reflection on the new dimensions of death was, of course, also something that Austria-Hungary had to undertake very soon after the outbreak of the war. As the ranks of the 2.5 million strong army were decimated on the Russian battlefield, which also prompted the elderly Emperor Franz Joseph to deliberate on this issue. Until then, Soldiers were buried in mass graves in cemeteries near battlefields or military hospitals, while officers were buried in individual graves. This honor was also given to soldiers who had distinguished themselves by heroic acts. Thus, most soldiers were buried under the unknown soldiers label and even shared their fate with that of their enemies. The realization that the Russian enemy buried members of the Austro-Hungarian army in a more respectful manner, namely officers were buried in individual graves, while soldiers were put in mass graves with their first and last names described, also brought about a change in the attitude and burial procedures of the soldiers on the Austro-Hungarian side. At the end of 1916, Germany and Austria-Hungary jointly organized a major traveling exhibition, the Military Grave and the War Memorial, which was hosted in Vienna at the Austrian Museum of Art and Industry, which also joined the War Ministry in drawing up guidelines for the erection of war graves and memorials. The instructions drew a conceptual distinction between war graves and cemeteries and war memorials and places of remembrance, which shall honor the memory of a fallen hero and be erected throughout the country. Commemorations should adorn public buildings and homes, church, school, and municipal facades. In principle, graves were divided according to the type of burial into individual graves, mass graves, or groups of individual graves, where each soldier buried was identified, while mass of common graves was sometimes the result of the fact that the deceased could not be identified or the dynamics of the war required such a simple solution even for identified fallen soldiers. A very telling indicator of the latter are the registers of military units where burials in common graves were recorded when heavy battles were being fought without the necessary let up for a proper burial. The wish as well as the instruction was that individual graves should not be scattered throughout the land, but that was not always possible and soldiers were only exhumated and reburied later. In the Soča region, that only occurred, as we already heard, in 1920s when cemeteries began to be merged or moved from the high and uplands to the valleys by the Italian state. Returning to the burial practices, the instruction was that officers should always be buried in individual graves, in so-called priority locations, either against the wall or in elevated parts of the cemetery, but in graves identical in basic form and appearance to the others. The appearance should be modest, whereby it was specifically emphasized that personal or family preferences regarding memorials would not be taken into account. The instructions for the cemeteries dictated the choice of quiet places, woodland groves, the symbolism of which was traced back to Germanic mythology, where the gods were worshipped in groves. This is before temples and churches. The Austrian aesthetic of both military and artistic matters was obviously inspired by the German ally that had formerly led the Austrian war effort since the autumn 1916. Military cemeteries were meant to blend into environment with prudent use of materials and shapes. Graves today were more commonly crosses, simple gravestones or name plates. The instructions dictated that the latter be dark with a white inscription or the other way around, but by no means golden or silver. Everything was well thought out, including the planting of low vegetation, while larger trees could only be planted in the corner or in the center. So, as expected, the Soča region, the former front line, was the largest number of military cemeteries. 74 according to the Register of Immovable Cultural Heritage, and over 200 according to a very superficial count in the archival register of military cemeteries in the War Archives in Vienna. The larger in terms of the number of people buried is in the village of Goriansko. The highest monument stands at the cemetery of Soča, while the most striking, at least from my point of view, is located in local mountain. After more than 100 years, the time has clearly come to finally fulfill the commitment to employ individual approach also in the research of those buried in military cemeteries, whereby it is of course necessary to take into consideration the aforementioned preliminary research and already made databases, which I hope can eventually also be integrated into the database set up in the framework of the Walk of Peace, the Sustainable Development of First World War Heritage between the Alps and the Adriatic project. The database was set up as a part of the History of Slovenia's History portal, which is an online system of Slovenian historiography, which not only enables access to historical content relevant for the study of Slovenian history, but also offers the possibility to create research data and use it in a research environment. The portal first published a database of World War II casualties, and in 2018, with the cooperation of many Slovenian institutions and individuals, a database of the fallen Slovenian soldiers in World War I was set up. Alongside stands a database of soldiers buried in military cemeteries in the Soča region, excluding the upper Soča region. At the moment, it only includes selected military cemeteries in central Soča region, on nations.The and the Karst region, where most of the soldiers were killed on the battlefield of the Isonzo Front are actually buried. And these are some details of the database. The main sources for the research were the censuses of the war graves kept by the Vienna War Archive Kriegsarchiv under the category Verlusten, Kriegsgräber Italien, so losses, war graves Italy, which contains a catalogue of those buried in each military cemetery. With basic information about the person buried and the place of burial, the Italian list of then the other sources, the Italian list of the interred remains, the so-called elenco dei militari sepolti nel cimitero, for example, Banšice, which were compiled by a special office called Ufficio Centrale per la Cura e Onoranze alle Salme dei Caduti in Guerra. Then we used also the material held by the Ministry of Labour, Family, Social Affairs and Equal Opportunities, which was partly handed over to the Walk of Peace Foundation in the Soča region. The methodology used to set up the database for the upper Soča region was also of great help. As Mr. Lovro Galic has already pointed out, in order to make the data as reliable as possible, it would be necessary to compare the different sources. One of the main sources, apart from these cadastres and the registration sheets, the so-called evidence block for military cemeteries, are the regimental registers, the so-called Militärmatriken, which are kept in the War Archive in Vienna. However, there are still restrictions imposed on their use, as the registers can only be copied by hand. On the other hand, the Czechs and the Slovaks have digitalized their own registers, the same source that we have to transcribe by hand. The access is subject to payment and supervision by the archival officials, because the material is protected by the Personal Data Protection Act. Other reference sources are the so-called phonetic cards, the so-called Totenkartei, as Weltkrieges, which contains around 1.4 million cards with phonetic transcriptions of the last names of soldiers who died in the Austro-Hungarian army during the First World War. Above all, such a comparative study would require the position and participation of individual units in each sector of the battlefield to be covered, which is far beyond our collective financial and human resources scope. In the knowledge that used sources may contain flaws, we nevertheless rely on the Austrian War Cemeteries cadastres and Italian transcripts with basic information: first name, last name, date of birth, date of death, cemetery, military unit, burial location, and present name of the legal residence of the buried soldier. Data on this list is often incomplete, with the names of buried soldiers also missing. However, it is important to acknowledge that the database will be continuously updated with the new entries and will become a reference point for researchers in this field as well as the relatives of the buried soldiers. Thank you for your attention.
Izzivi in težave raziskovanja vojaških pokopališč iz Prve svetovne vojne. Michael Ušić from the Foundation about the challenges in researching the military cemeteries of the Great War.
Thank you very much. So my intervention will be mainly practical, and so we were working on this topic for the last 3 years. And I will show you with which kind of problems we are facing and what we are trying to achieve. So I will use this example about what we are trying to achieve. So at the beginning of this year, maybe it was at the beginning of February or March, I was contacted by a relative of this soldier, and it was known that he died during an avalanche. During the January of 1917, and it was known that he died by the avalanche in the area of Blokenpass. So it was quite easy to find him. I contacted Lady Renate Gregoric from Österreichische Schwarze Platz, and we found his grave in the Kreuzstraße military cemetery. And a few months ago, I went there, and it's perfect. It's like a cemetery should be. If you are searching for a relative, when you come there, practically every grave has its cross, and every cross has its name. So, I mean, it's really fabulous. I made a short pass across, and I noticed that there are quite many names which are very familiar to me. They are from this area. So I decided that I will make a picture of all of them, and I made a register. So it's quite easy if you start with, if you are researching a cemetery, it's obviously that you will start with the research of the cemetery, and you will look on the tombstones, and you will search for names. And then you will compare it with the documents that you will find them in the archive. But when we started our work, we have to deal with this. So the majority of the cemeteries in our area, they are practically without any tombstones. And even if they are without any metal plates and without any names or surnames. Just a few of them are left, and these ones are practically new. They are not from the First World War. So it's quite a difficult thing to do, and it's a challenge, really, how to give back the names to the soldiers who were taken, practically. Their names were taken away. And practically it's a very, very difficult job. Just few of the cemeteries have some tombstones where inscriptions are carved, or maybe some of them have also metal plates on top with the name. So sometimes it's enough if you have just a few tombstones all across the cemetery, and you can decipher the register from the First World War or later, when the Italian systemation was going on. So these are the main military cemeteries across Slovenia and in Friuli. So we have across 60 military cemeteries in the area on the Isonzo, and around 20 further back. And we practically, 10 years ago, the cemeteries, military cemeteries in the upper Soča Valley were researched, and now we were researching these ones. So the majority of them have been researched. We have just, in the next years, hopefully we will make a database where the relatives could use this data to find the last place of burial of their ancestors. So some of them have been researched, the green dots, the red, they're still missing, and the orange one are partly researched, because obviously a very good job was done in the area of Duino, Risina, Palmanova, and Brazzano, but a lot of these data, they don't have detailed information, so they don't have like date of birth or where the soldiers come from. So we will have to correct this in the following years. So we have to understand what happened. We have to go back in the time of war. So at the end of May 1915, the war started, and the first graves were placed all across the area. First behind the first line, in every possible places, and also in the worst possible places. But mainly the military cemeteries were made next to the military hospitals, and the beginning, the graves were made on the civilian cemeteries, and then they were enlarged and they became practically their own military cemeteries. The first time that it was possible really systematically arrange the cemeteries was after the 12th battle, when the front moved from the Isonzo towards Piave, and then the majority of sketches, of good sketches that we have, are from 1918. So from April until September, October of 1918, the majority of these cemeteries were reorganized by Austro-Hungarian units. So we were researching this data, which obviously there are different archives which contains several different documentation, but mainly we were searching this one, which is in Krigsarkiv, and practically during the war it was established a mission inspection, Krigsarkiv inspection, and this material that was collected during the war was given to Krigsarkiv. And they, for our region, for the Isonzo, there are 403 folders in approximately 40 boxes. And they are practically have a name, they are in the full font Krigsarkiv Italian, because during when this font was established, practically our region was a part of Italy. Then for the Italian cemeteries, it's a little bit problematic. We don't know exactly how many military cemeteries were established during the war, but from encyclopedia we know that across all the entire front between Italy and Austria, there were almost 3,000 military cemeteries. And this data was collected by the Società di Solferino San Martino, but today the researchers and the historians from Italy are unable to access this material. So nobody knows where it is, or nobody wants to know where it is. We don't know. So these are the data that comes from the folders of the military cemeteries in Vienna. Mainly every cemetery contains a register of the graves and the catastrophe blood. So this is some sort of a monthly report of the graves made in 1 month. So this is for the January, from the 1st of January until the end of January 1916. And at the end, every monthly report, every catastrophe blood should have also a sketch, but very rarely you have them. But this is example for the military cemetery of Karvachina, and it's perfect, really. For every grave on the cemetery, you can tell where it was put in and where, on which number he has it. So you can practically research on this one. I've made it complete, but it took me really a lot of time. And then also the complete sketches of the military cemetery were made, and as I told you, the majority of these sketches of the systemated military cemeteries are from year 1980. This is from September. This is for Bulgarian military cemetery. So then the front has shifted and the Italians came back and they conquered all the area that they had it before, and they've established some sort of a committee which was rearranging the cemeteries. And later on also a special office was in charge to systematically maintain the cemeteries or reorganize the cemeteries. So in that period, in the 20s, 103 Italian military cemeteries were arranged in this area, and also from the pictures, it's very easy to tell from which period are they, because in the 20s, practically during the First World War, the cemetery were not uniform, but later in the 20s, practically uniform graves were put all across the cemetery. And also in that time, 60 Austro-Hungarian military cemeteries were arranged on the zones of one German ossuary. And in that period, the Italians were reorganizing the cemeteries, and this is an example of which kind of register they were making. So this is the example of Soča military cemetery, and we don't know. If we compare, if we research different approaches, it doesn't seem that there is one general approach to making the cemetery to enlarge them. Because, for example, here in Soča we have normally the military cemeteries were just enlarged. So there was no place in between graves, so they were just enlarging it. But here in Soča we can see that from the grave of Michael Halamei, this was tomba resistente, so this was already grave there. And also the next grave, it was exhumed and transported to this cemetery. The next one grave, it was already there. So every second grave, another one was put inside. And this is practically the best register that we have, because we can use the sketch from the First World War, and we compare it, and we can say, yeah, in between these two graves, this soldier was exhumed from Cimitero, the Candida from Canale. But very few registers are made in this way. So you can see also the sketch from Soča military cemetery. So in the middle of each grave, another one was put from the old cemeteries. So this is an example of the military cemetery tutorial. This is another story. So we know how is the situation in this part of the military cemetery, but unfortunately, this part of the cemetery is completely unknown to us. We can't figure out just from the register how the tombs were placed all across the cemetery, because from the Italian period, there are mainly no sketches. Until now, I've seen just two of them, and for the rest, practically, we have to compare all the data that exists, but mainly we can't really rely on the sketches from the Italian period because we don't have them. We tried to research some things in Rome, but we were not allowed to enter to some parts of the archive, and maybe we will try in the next years, but for now we were unsuccessful. Then this is the third example, how the systemation of the cemeteries were made. So this is the military cemetery of Čepovan, really near the church. We know that in this grave, in the second line, in the grave 60, it's Holasek František, because we see it on the photo. And when we compare it with the register from the Italian period, we see that all of these names from the entire cemetery are just in one line. because the Italians have made quite good register, and they've reorganized practically. They've made it quite good systemation. Normally they've divided the cemetery in 4 different sectors, in field A, field B, field C, and field D. And every field has its own lines, and in every line there were different graves. And we know that all these graves in the Italian census are just in one line. So this is the example of Isonzo military cemetery, and also this is a little bit special because we know from the register of the Italian systemation that they were using also the source material from Vienna. What happened? So they were systemating the cemetery, and when they ended their work, they wrote at the end of the register, according to the Austrian register, there are 80 graves missing. So practically, somebody was searching the data, and on the cemetery, 80 graves were missing. And if the Italians didn't found them in the 20s and in the 30s, I don't think that we will ever find them. And this is also a very difficult case. This is the military cemetery of Soča, near Kobarid. Also here, the military cemetery was enlarged, so practically this is the main monument, the central monument. All this place here, it's now practically filled with graves, but we don't know where they are. Obviously, there are tombstones placed across the field, but they are just symbolically placed. So, and even if we compare this sketch with the register of the Italian burials, excavation and reburials, we can't know where the graves are put, because even if we compare names, there are hundreds and hundreds of names taken from the mountains, and practically nobody was researching in the archive, so probably we will never know where the graves are. And then also in the end of the 30s, the Italians also decided the approach of the systemation of their military cemeteries, and they constructed 3 main ossuaries. All of the other Austro-Hungarian cemeteries were taken care. We know we have a register from Rome, and practically every private property was paid during the Italian period. We know, and every military cemetery had its own keeper. But later on, after the Second World War, these military cemeteries were abandoned in the majority of cases. So just later on in the 80s, some work was done by the Österreichische Schwarze Kreuz, but otherwise the majority of these military cemeteries were abandoned. And some of them were also forgotten. So I would like to conclude with a story. So years ago, a man was searching for the grave of his ancestor. This is the military cemetery of Soča. He went there with my dear colleague Dragos Sedmak from Ajdovščina, and he found that there are several crosses across the wall of the military cemetery, and obviously he found the names of his 2 uncles, but obviously he couldn't find the place where they are put in the ground. So he went all across the cemetery. He stepped near every and each cross, and he prayed. So you can imagine. So, and these stories, these feelings, very often get passed through the generations. So we really should take care of these military cemeteries and the memories of the relatives. So thank you very much.
Torej, od arhivskega dela k novejšim pristopom. From the first part, researching archives and also footwork, tudi delo na terenu, gremo, let's see, the newer approaches, new
myself, and today I'm going to tell you something about the lab aspect of analyzing human remains from war graves. Specifically, I'm going to talk about DNA analysis. So let's dive right in. Yeah. So first, what do we actually do? When I say we analyze skeletonized human remains, so we mostly analyze like old bones and teeth found in like cemeteries or like graves, and we do it by like analyzing DNA. And what is DNA? So DNA is that's right here. So this is deoxyribonucleic acid. It's basically a sequence of molecules that's in every cell of your body. It's basically a code with instructions that determine the makeup of your body. And yeah, it's found throughout all the tissues, also like bone tissue. So first, I would like to tell you what can we actually, what information can we actually get by analyzing DNA in relation to like history. So first we can determine ancestry with mitochondrial DNA, with Y chromosome, with ancestry informative markers. What does this mean? So we can actually determine like a genetic population to which a certain person belongs to. Like for example, right now we are researching some Second World War remains, and we are trying to determine whether those people that were killed like after Second World War were like belong to German or Slavic population. Then we can, for example, determine phenotype. What does this mean? Phenotype is observable characteristics, like for example, the color of your eyes. Here I have an example of a couple that was killed during the Second World War, and the woman, she didn't like there weren't any relatives, so it was impossible to actually identify her with the help of like relatives or personal items. So what we did is like here is a painting from a museum in Ljubljana, and we actually like were able to determine from analyzing DNA from the bones, we were able to predict the color of her eyes, the color of her hair, for example, color of her skin, and we actually compared it to the painting of the lady. Then we can actually establish the identity of the person. For this, we would need like either a close relative or like a personal item, so we can compare genetic profiles. And last but not least, we can determine the lineage to which a certain person belongs to. For example, like with the help of mitochondrial DNA, we can determine maternal lineage, which means we can determine like if a certain person belonged to the on the mother's side of the family, and we can determine like for everyone like the mitochondrial DNA is inherited by everyone, no matter the sex, but only women can give it on. And the paternal lineage, which is only inherited through Y chromosome, so we can only follow the males through like certain family lineage. I will talk you a bit through the process of what we actually do. I will start with excavation. Like here you can see this is from Ljubljana. This is Auschwitz tomb from sequence it, which means we determine like sequence like here, and then we analyze it. Depends on what kind of question we want to actually answer, and depends on what kind of question we actually can answer. So, excavation. Here I have some photos and a map of Slovenia. So this is, for example, these little red dots that are marked on the map of Slovenia actually show like graves from the Second World War, like mass graves in Slovenia. And here we have some photos of those graves. Like, for example, in this one, it was a lot of like unmingled remains and bones. Like right now, we are working like doing a research on one of these mass graves. So how do we do this? First, we select a bone that we like find most suitable. Research showed that some bones are more appropriate to sample than others, and even some parts of bones are better to sample than others. So we can actually get more like DNA that's of a higher quality. So we have a better sequence, and therefore we can actually have more chances to identify to get some information out of the DNA. So we do this in a specially purpose room for working with skeletonized human remains, and we have a customized protocol. And it is very important to watch out for contamination, so we use like all the protection you can see here. It is also, of course, very important that we watch out for contamination even before we actually start working in lab, even when the excavation starts, for example, because contamination can begin already then, and the problem is that DNA we can get from, for example, bones from war graves. It's of a lesser quality, and there's like less of it, so it is very easily contaminated by like modern DNA from like living humans. So first, therefore, we like clean physically, then we cut and grind the bones. Here you can see like the process of cutting, and then we grind it in like with such a little metal ball and with this machine. So in the end, we get this fine bone dust, and then we like release with a chemical process DNA from the cell, and then we purify it, as you can see here. We use like closed systems, so there's less chance of contamination again. So because you can otherwise also do this by hand. And then we sequence it. So we now use two methods. One is more of a research nature. The other is more routine work. So a classic method and like more a newer method. Like the difference between them is to keep it short. Like the classic one right now has a lower cost for analysis like of if you want to get less data, it has lower cost. The other one is more expensive, but because like it's cheaper, but you can get less information for that money, and it's less sensitive, so you need more DNA to actually get some information out of it. It's less precise, it's like less accurate, and it's also slower. Like if you look at the final quantity of information you get, like the other one is faster, but the other one is also more automated, which is again very welcome. So do sequence analysis. So, as I said, depends on what we want to know, what the question is, what we actually can get from a certain material. We then either compare genetic profiles if we have direct close relatives or personal items from the person we want to identify. After comparison, the statistical evaluation of the match needs to be done. Or we can compare the sequence to a database. This is what we do now that we try to determine to which genetic population, for example, the victims belong to. And of course, the whole approach needs to be interdisciplinary. So you know how to critically evaluate the information you get. And I would like to also, in the end, say something about challenges that come with DNA analysis. So the first and foremost, as I said, is contamination. So therefore, extra caution is needed, from the very beginning, from the excavation to the very end, to the sequencing. For example, even at excavation, wearing gloves would be very much welcome. And inhibitors, this is something that comes because a lot of material from ore graves is found, for example, in caves or in forests. So there's a lot of substances in the ground where those bones lie for decades or even more. That can actually prevent isolation and sequencing. Then low quality samples are also a problem, and of course and then low quality and quantity of DNA. I have an example here of a cave bear from Postojna cave, which was there's a bone in here in stone, where the sequencing only of shorter areas was we were able only to sequence shorter areas because the DNA was very degraded, which could be a problem, for example, if we try to identify someone. So because if it's very degraded, you cannot get the whole area that you would need to actually compare it. And then lack of references. By references, I mean personal items or relatives. But even in this case, when there's lack of personal items or references, we can still, for example, try to determine the genetic population, or we can try phenotyping, so we can try to determine some sorts of characteristics of a person. And with newer methods and interdisciplinary approach, there might be even a chance that with those predictions, a drawing or a markup of a person can be made to very good detail. And here I have written what we actually do to prevent some of those things. Is that we use closed systems, we use protection wire, we thoroughly clean everything before use, we sterilize everything. Of course, we also create a database of information profiles. This means of everyone who was in contact with samples from excavation through everyone who ever
zadnjem tem delu Luka Škorjanec Augusta B.O. Dokumentacija in digitalizacija memorialne dediščine. Last in this session, digitalization and documenting of the memorial heritage.
Okay, so good afternoon everybody. My name is Luka Škorjanec and today we will talk about the documentation and digitalization of memorial heritage. I myself am an archaeologist. I'm currently employed at the private research organization called nations.The. We are primarily an archaeological firm and work mostly in commercial archaeology. And we are at the moment, I think, also the only firm in Slovenia that is active in the field of modern conflict archaeology. Through this, we also do a lot of digitization and promotion of archaeological sites and other cultural heritage sites, including, of course, memorial heritage. And when it comes to the documentation and digitization of structural heritage, we also work with architects and other professionals such as surveyors to get the best and most accurate results possible. So today's presentation will be roughly divided into two parts. In the first part, we take a quick look at the technology that we use for data capture, so primarily laser scanning and photogrammetry, the differences between the two methods, the pros and cons of each. Then we will also look at the kinds of data we get from these types of measurements and what we can actually do with the data. And then at the end, we also look at a case study of the digitization of the Church of the Holy Spirit in Yalova. So the first method that is widely used is laser scanning, or more specifically terrestrial laser scanning. This method allows us to capture accurate and high-resolution point clouds, and is, of course, completely uninvasive as it offers contactless data capture. And it is also extremely fast. The capture method for laser scanning requires setting up the instrument and scanning from multiple positions to get the optimal coverage of the monument or structure. The result itself is a scaled point cloud that is actually not georeferenced, so we have to do that in post-processing. And modern laser scanning equipment also has the option to capture color data or the RGB value for each individual point. Then we also have the options with some scanners that are equipped with cameras to capture 160-degree photos or actually panoramic photos of the objects or the structures. So once we have captured the raw data in the field, we need to of course, to process it. This usually means to georeference the points using markers that we set up during the data capturing phase, and to then measure with survey equipment such as this total station or a GPS. We then merge the different point clouds together so that we get one large point cloud that we then filter to remove unwanted objects such as noise and vegetation. And after that, we can actually use the point cloud to create detailed plans of the structure, or we can also use it to create a meshed 3D model of the structure itself. So when we look at the quantitative aspects of this method, we see that on one side we have exceptional measurement accuracy. The data capture is quite fast and gives us access to a lot of data, and we also have the option to capture the color of the points if we need it. Then on the other hand, we have the high upfront cost of the hardware. This can be actually extremely expensive. Also, the software for cloud processing is usually proprietary and specific to the brand of laser that you own or that you have. And they often also come with subscription services or subscription fees. is also a problem when it comes to capturing or scanning complex structures that need to be scanned from multiple different angles. The whole process can then take quite a while, can become quite time-consuming, and at times it can also be almost impossible to actually capture the whole structural monument. So the other method that we use is called photogrammetry. Photogrammetry in essence creates 3D models from normal 2D photos. It uses an algorithm called structure for motion to calculate camera coordinates based on the image overlay that allows us to extract the depth information from 2D photos. The data capture for this method involves taking a lot of pictures of the desired structure of a monument, and we have to take the pictures from different angles and get as many points of view as possible to get at least 60% coverage of the between images for the whole structure. Then when it comes to data processing, to extract and get information from the picture, we need to first calculate the camera alignment. This gives us the so-called sparse points that we later use to build the dense point cloud. In this stage, we also need to georeference and scale the point cloud. For this, we use markers, same as before, with the place in the structure or object, and then measured with survey equipment. And for scaling and measurement accuracy, we also use scalars that have determined dimensions, so that we know the dimensions of, and then we can check for errors and for any problems with the point cloud. So the next step actually involves building and filtering the dense cloud. We can then use to build 3D model or 3D mesh of the structure of the object, and then in the last phase use the photos themselves to extract the texture information and then project those images onto the 3D model so that you get lifelike or photorealistic surface. So at this point the main processing is done, and we can start using the data for specific things that we need. Most often when we build plans or draw plans, we use the open mosaic function that creates high resolution images of the desired objects. And we can also build digital elevation models for measurements and so on. And in the last phase, of course, we need to optimize the data itself, because usually it's quite intensive, there's quite a lot of it. So if you want to use it with other programs and other software, you need to optimize for that. So when we look at the pros of this method, we can achieve very accurate models with high resolution and detail, sometimes even more than with traditional laser scanning. But the downside is that the images itself need to be taken correctly, and of course, with a large amount of the pictures, as we can get a lot of artifacts and noise in the data. The data capture itself is extremely flexible, especially when we combine normal cameras with drone cameras, and we can get ways it possible to capture quite a lot of data that stationary laser scanners simply can't reach. Photogrammetry is also very cost effective, and there are open source software options for packages available for data processing and creating 3D models. The biggest problem that we have with photogrammetry is the fact that we need to have a good photographer to actually take the pictures and do them right. Also, sometimes it can be quite difficult to take images on site, especially if it comes it's outside, not inside. So we have lots of variations in lighting, and lots of shadows, and also dense simply will not work. And there is also the fact that this method requires a lot of post-processing, that it can be quite hardware intensive, and for larger data sets requires quite a powerful computer to run data and to compute all the models. So we can see that both laser scanning and photogrammetry have the good and bad sides. It is also important to understand that we can actually combine the data from both methods, and in practice in the field, normally when we do a site or digitize a site, we use both laser scanning and drones and normal cameras to capture the data. So yeah, the next part we will take a look at an example. In this case, it is the digitization of the memorial church of the Holy Spirit in Javorca. The church itself is located just north of Turin and was built in 1916 by the third mountain brigade of the 15th Corps to commemorate the fallen Austro-Hungarian defenders of the Turin battlefield of the Isonzo Front. The church structure is made primarily of wood and is richly painted and decorated, and inside the church you also find oak panels with the names of the fallen Austro-Hungarian soldiers that were members of different combat units and nationalities. The digitization itself took place in 2017, and it was a combination of terrestrial laser scanning and also airborne and ground photogrammetry. So in the next part, I will show you a quick animation of the results of the 3D model on the point cloud. So yeah, that's it. So yeah, this also demonstrates how the data can be used to visualize and promote these monuments to a wide audience. So this is the 3D model itself. Then later we will also see the point cloud. So this method allows us to capture really the whole object or the whole structure and to get all the data available. Here we can do cross sections, so we can go into the building itself and around and measure whatever you want, because all the points are geo-referenced and scaled, so you can do really whatever you want with the data almost. So yeah, if you move on, here you can see the inside of the church. These are the old mosaics that were created using the data that was captured with the laser and with photogrammetry. In this case, you see the water itself and also the home panels with the names of the fallen soldiers. So the whole inside of the church was captured this way, and you can extract the image information from the data. So one of the main reasons for digitalization is, of course, preservation of the monument from either man-made or natural disasters. In this case, we worked with architects who used scanning data of the point cloud to create detailed plans of the outside of the church. This way we have really detailed blueprint in case restoration work is needed, or if the church somehow gets damaged in any way. So in this case we see the west side of the church on the west side. We also have the front and back with this decorated panels that show the heraldic symbols of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. this way, or along this way. And as part of the digitalization process, we also created a virtual tour. This is not actually using traditional, let's say, 3D data, but more 360-degree panoramic images that allows visitors to explore the entirety of the outside and inside of the church in great detail. So it's available on the website, and you can have a look inside if you so desire. So this was a quick look at this is one of the main digitalization projects that our firm did over the years. In connection with World War I monuments, we also worked on the military cemetery in Kobarid. When a couple of months ago, we also excavated the Bosnian mosque that was located quite close to the actual cemetery, but we also worked on many other monuments. For example, also the Russian chapel and many others. So that would be all for me today. Thanks for your attention, and I would also like to invite you to check out our 3D models that we publish on this our account on Sketchfab. So they are available for public to view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now treba damo možnost za razpravo. So I hope also the possibility for a debate, for a discussion. Any questions, Šanja ali prispevki?
Jaz bi se na besede Mihalšiča obrnil. Glede vzdrževanja pokopališčnih armat. V Kobaridu je italijanska kostnica. Do leta 1957 je za to kostnico skrbela kobariška občina. Leta 1956 je prvič prišel generalni konzul Italije iz Kobra, pohvalil občino, da lepo vzdržuje, in od 70 leta naprej je skrb za to kostnico prevzela italijanska država. Kar se tiče ostalih pokopališč tujih armat na našem ozemlju, pa je situacija taka. 1966 je prvi dopis dan, ko je občina Kobarid na podlagi komiteja za socialne zadeve pripravila popis teh pokopališč tujih armat. Od 1973 je tajnik občine Tomin Stočer pripravil ves popis z vsemi znanimi podatki za vsake pokopališča tujih armat. Potem je nastopil potres 1976 leta in takoj po potresu je bila formirana komisija za popravilo cerkvice v Javorca, vodila je Livi Denice, in iz potresnih sredstev je potem se namenil denar za obnovo cerkvice in potem je bila ta cerkvica prvič obnovljena. Kar se tiče pa pokopališč tujih armat, 1978 leta je to razvel oddelek za pravno zadeve na občini Tolmin in 1979 leta je pa, jaz sem bil tedaj načelnik tega oddelka in sem pa res prevzel to skrb za ta pokopališča tujih armat. In od 80 do 83 so bila vsa pokopališča tujih armat obnovljena po načrtih arhitekta Zavoda za spomeniško varstvo Darja Humana. To je bila prva obnova v začetku 80-ih let. In moram povedati, da ta obnova je vsegala pa nujna dela, poseg drevja in tako naprej. Grobovi, grobna polja so ostala nedotaknjena. Druga obnova je začela sredi 90-ih let, ko je vodilo Ministrstvo za delo. Jaz sem bil tiskrat vključen v upravna enota, ki je prevzela tudi skrb za vzdrževanje teh pokopališč. No, načrte je podelilo Ministrstvo za delo. In tisto je prišlo do korenitih popravkov, ne vem, če prav dobrih popravkov na teh pokopališčih, ko so se vsa grobna polja zravnala. In tudi spomenike odstranili, potem recimo Modrejca se je na novo na sredi postavljajo spomenike, tako naprej so kakih tujih v 90-ih letih nastala pokopališči. Mi smo skrbeli tudi za nemško kosmico v Tolminu, no, pred 20 leti na januarju, ko smo vedeli, kdaj je pa skrb za nemško kosmico prevzela nemška država, pa malo desna nemška. Zelo te vedeli, kako je to potekalo.
I would just like to add briefly to what Mihovic has said about the maintenance and the care for the various cemeteries of the foreign houses, of course. Because when it comes to the ossuary here in Kobarid up until 1956, it was the municipality of Kobarid who was taking care of that. And then in 1957, the General Consul of the Italian Republic came and took over, and from that moment it's the Italian Republic taking care of that. Then in 1963 we saw the first attempt to making a census of all the foreign army cemeteries that we have here in the Isonzo region. It was Kobarid who was doing that and later on 1970, and by 1973 he already had the census list made. Then there were efforts, and I have to mention Vincent, who was working on that in 1976, because we had to do something after the earthquake that we had here in 1976. Other dates that are important. In 1978, it was the municipality of Tumino, the office of reference at the municipality, because I was working there, who took over and started about taking care of the cemeteries of foreign armies here. And then in 1979, I took over in another office, I was working there. And I can say that between 1980 and 1983, we have actually managed to take care or to renovate all of the military cemeteries we have here. When I talk about renovation, I intend we did only the most basic work needed, just cutting shrubs and trees, not touching the tombs themselves. And we were following the advice of architect David, whom I'm here to say how to do things properly. And though it was hard work, we did it. In the mid-90s, things changed because the thing was taken over by the Ministry of Labour, and so they made some radical interventions of renovation, which I'm not quite sure that were always really needed or good. So sometimes they really just leveled out the entire field or removed monuments then to replace by other monuments which do not belong there, but that's what it was. Okay. So, for example, that is an example of Modrejca. But I just wanted to explain to you how things are going and how things have been done so far here.
Thank you for very professional and very interesting presentation and discussion. Thank you very much. Bom naprej v slovenščini, da bom pravzaprav lažje strnil misli. Bom pa začel tam, kjer je pravzaprav gospod Zdravko Likar nehal. Ko je pristojnost vojaških grobišč prišla v samostojni Sloveniji na Ministrstvo za delo, družino in pa sedaj po 30 letih na Ministrstvo za obrambo se soočamo z enim velikim mankom in to so pomanjkljive evidence. Če pogledamo pred več kot 100 leti, so bile evidence grobišč, imen, pokopanih, predvsem pa lokacija pokopov izredno natančno vodene, zapisane, evidentirane in vodene se strani tako italijanske kot avstrijske države oziroma držav naslednic Avstro-Ogrske. Tukaj moram povedati, da v Republiki Sloveniji imamo zelo odkrito in velik manko teh evidenc, da so nam mlajši kolegi v drugim delu pokazali sodobne pristope in to domačo nalogo bomo pač morali v naslednjih, upam, da preko 30 letih tudi narediti. Jaz se moram pravzaprav zahvaliti kot generalni direktor uprave za vojaško dediščino pristojni za vojaška grobišča, pravzaprav vam razpravljavcem, ki ste danes pravzaprav sploh pokazal meni in moji ekipi, ki ni velika, s čim se pravzaprav tukaj na lokalnem nivoju ukvarjate. To je veliko delo, ki to upravljate. Vaše znanstveni prispevki so pravzaprav prispevki, ki jih nažalost pozna zelo, zelo malo ljudi na neki splošni ravni, ampak so to zelo ekspertne zadeve, zelo jasne zadeve, ki so pravzaprav globoko strokovne in jaz mislim, da dokaj bom jaz vodil upravo in tudi moji sodelavci imajo to smeritev, je to, da se srečujemo, da se pogovarjamo in da probamo zadeve, ki v 30 letih v Republiki Sloveniji niso bile urejene, na nek način urediti. Nenazadnje se gre za ljudi, za mrtve ljudi, nenazadnje se gre za naše sodržavljane, mogoče za naše prednike, za naše člane družin, ki so pač v teh svetovnih morijah na naših tleh padli. Jaz ne bom sodil v temu, ali to prav, to ni bilo prav, samo tako, kot sem povedal v svojem navodnem nagovoru. Civilizacijska norma in naša pravzaprav demokratična obveznost je, da spoštljivo skrbimo za te pokopališča, vojaška pokopališča, da spoštljivo poskrbimo za evidenco teh imen, da jo digitaliziramo, da vsi tisti, ki iščejo te prednike po slovenskih tleh, da imajo, tako kot je tukaj fundacija pod miru, tako kot je živa enciklopedija zadnjih 50 in več let, tukaj gospod Zdravko Likar, da imajo v organiziranem načinu, tako kot je fundacija, tako kot je nenazadnje znanstveni inštitut, oziroma tukaj Akademija znanosti in umetnosti, nenazadnje pa tudi uprava za vojaško dediščino, naslovnika, na katere se lahko pravzaprav vsi ti iskalci svojih prednikov obrnejo. In naša dolžnost je, da te imena, da te grobišča, da te, bom rekel, kraje, ki so na naših tleh ravno zaradi te morije, če danes naslavljamo ta vojaška pokopališča, ne vem, ravno zaključujemo z deli na tudi eni tragični zgodbi naše zgodovine, to so povojni poboji v Kočevskih gozdovih, v Cestnovi Gorici, ki je ravno kolega iz firme Augusta predstavljal to digitalni proces tega njihovega dela, da to naredimo spoštljivo, da to naredimo neideološko, da to naredimo na nek način civilizacijsko. In jaz se moram ravno kot direktor uprave za vojaško dediščino res zahvaliti za vaš prispevek, za vašo mednarodno upetost, za vaše znanje, ki ga pravzaprav ne dajete samo večino v službenem času, ampak je to vaš način življenja, da se s tem ukvarjate. To je mnogokrat presega profesionalno delo, to je pomeni tudi odrekanje mnogim stvarem, tudi vašim družinam. In jaz se vam moram z tega mesta iskreno zahvaliti in tudi čestitati za vaš prispevek. In nenazadnje, za vse to, kar sem danes slišal, je mene zelo, zelo poučno, mnogi stvari nove in jaz v vas vidim sogovornika v tistih zadevah, v katerih na upravi za vojaško dediščino kot administrativnemu organu, ki je tisti, ki te stvari združuje, svetovalce, strokovnjake, tiste osebe, na katere se mi vedno lahko obrnemo, in jaz sem za ta vaš prispevek, ne samo k tej civilizacijski normi, da te stvari uredimo, da za njih skrbimo, da imamo do njih odnos, kot ga pravzaprav normalni ljudje do takih grobišč imamo, pravzaprav prispevek tudi k znanosti. Danes smo kar nekaj stvari slišali, ki prispevajo k vojaški znanosti in tukaj iz najvišje instance Ministrstva za obrambo tudi zelo cenim. Hvala lepa in res sem ponosen, da sem bil lahko del tega posveta. Hvala.
Of course, I would like to thank you for what we've seen here today. And what pointed out by our colleague here is true. I think that since the Ministry of Defense took over the competence over the military cemeteries from the Ministry of Labour and Social Relations, we have discovered that there is a huge gap. There is a huge lack, and it's lack of registers, of documentation, of things being followed up and written down. And we have to admit that, yes, because 100 years ago we have the records made by the Austro-Hungarians, the Italians, the Germans, and these records are really well done. They are well written, well documented. And all the countries that have succeeded the Austro-Hungarian Empire have shown that really they managed to keep the records up until today. Unfortunately, it's not true for Slovenia, and we are admitting that. Now, as we have taken over the Ministry of Defense that job, I have to say that we have lots of homework to do, and I hope it will not take another 30 years to fix all that. Because of two reasons. I mean, there are two main reasons why we have to do it and want to do it. One, of course, is a simple norm of civilization, as I said in my introductory speech. So it's about victims, about young boys that have died there, young men. And it's just to show respect for the fallen victims, to keep their memory, to keep them honored. That's why we have to set the records straight. And another, of course, is scientific work, also to have the records, to have the archives, to have the data correct. And so, it's not an easy task, but as we have taken over that competence, I think we will not do that straight away, but we will make the best effort. Of course, I would like to thank you for that, for today's meeting. I think it's just one of the first in a line, hopefully a long line of meetings, because as I took over the ministry, I believe this is the right approach. We will meet in the future, we will discuss, because we need you, we need experts, we need our advisors to do the job I have just described. And I was very happy at being here today. I've seen many new things, lots of new information. I've seen the new approaches by the new generations. And we will also, yes, need all that, those tools from DNA analysis and digitalization and all that. So it is our duty to do that, as I said, as a sign of honor, respect for the fallen soldiers, and also as a contribution to scientific work. And that's why I would like to thank all of you that have contributed to that, because when people come from other countries to this region, to Kobarid, to the Soča region, they need to have someone to turn to look up their ancestors, like they have the living encyclopedia here, or the Institute, or the foundation or the museum here in Kobarid. So it's our duty to do that. So to make these places really places of memory that can be properly researched, analyzed, and also people can be actually found. I would like to thank you, therefore, for this day, and I'm promising you that we will keep cooperating very strictly with my office, with the authority for the military heritage of the Ministry of Defense, because I set out what our tasks are, what we need to do. And I would like to thank you also for all your effort, all your work, because it is not, you're not taking it as a job. You are really showing lots of dedication, lots of willingness to even make sacrifices against your families and everything. It's not a day job. It's something you are doing really with dedication, and I would like to thank you. I would like to thank you for inviting me. I really feel honored that I was invited here for that today. And so I must just repeat once more that at the Ministry, at my office, we really appreciate your work a lot. Thank you. Sedaj pa now, da ne bomo podaljševali razprave, ker smo že dolgo sedeli, ne? So we've been sitting for quite a while here now, and that's why I would like to just invite you all downstairs to a coffee break. Imamo za kavo.